Hi, I'm Greg.
And I'm Leanne,
Welcome to Empowered Now,
where we save humanity
one relationship at a time.
We all struggle from time to time connecting with and understanding others and ourselves.
So we hope to encourage you to live a more authentic and empowered life by sharing what we've learned as coaches and as individuals.
Empowered Now is LGBTQ2IA, alternative lifestyle, poly, and kink friendly.
Thanks for joining us
And enjoy the show.
Hello. Welcome to episode 19 of Empowered Now, where today we're going to talk all about toxic relationships. Leanne, this is a topic that is pretty near and dear to your heart. It's one that you suggested that we do, and I fully support this because I definitely think it's something that we need to talk a lot about and have a lot more conversations about. Specifically, I think this is really one of the key things in my experience, as well as in my research and in my personal life, is separating the idea that there's a toxic person and the toxic behavior. Right? Because people by nature aren't toxic, but their behaviors and the way they connect and the relationships that we're in can be toxic, right? So I think it's really important to denote or differentiate between those two things. Because, my man is toxic or whatever, or my relationship. No, let's get away from judging the person, but let's focus on the behavior. Right?
Exactly.
Isn't that kind of the core here of what you're talking about and what this is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. And these are learned behaviors. These are coping strategies that we learn in our foundational relationships, right? And sometimes they're based too in our attachment style that forms again in our foundational relationships. So for, anxiously attached, we tend to want to grasp on to people and have them near us. And when we're not near them, we feel unstable. That can, feed into your own toxic behaviors, or it might be why you invite toxic behaviors into your life and allow them, right?
Yeah.
And then beyond that, some people, I would say, have a sort of clinical diagnosis. And I don't want to pathologize behaviors, but we know that they're out there. And so I think it's important that we're distinguishing for this purpose that if you have a true narcissist or a psychopath or a sociopath in your world, those folks, may have some real difficulty changing. We need some willingness to make those changes and to take personal responsibility. And if that's a challenge for them, you're not going to be able to probably help them with that. They're going to need some more professional therapeutic intervention, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you say that you're not going to be able to help them with that. I think they have to want to help themselves.
Absolutely.
Is the point, right? That's kind
Yes.
of take responsibility for themselves and help themselves ultimately, right?
But if that isn't a kind of normal way of thinking for them, right? It might be a real stretch for them to even get to the place of personal responsibility. So that's what I mean in terms of sort of understanding. We're talking about those folks who are willing and able to make changes in their lives. They want to, they're capable of self-reflection and they have personal responsibility as a core value, Those are the folks we're talking to and the partners that are with them. We're going to talk about both.
And when you say partners, it's also important to note that we've tried our best to consider the scope, to consider the spectrum of all relationships, not just romantic relationships or intimate relationships, but family, colleagues, so professional relationships, friendships, the whole nine yards, because we're all relating, right? On some level, even your relationship with the barista at Starbucks or your favorite coffee shop or whatever, right?
Yeah.
When even in those moments, there can be the toxic behaviors can come up.
Sure.
Right. And we'll get into this in a bit more, but in those moments, oftentimes is where the work starts to happen. It's just like, why the fuck did I just say that to that person? They didn't deserve that.
Yeah.
Or, I'm having a bad day. That's not their fault kind of stuff. Right. So anyway,
absolutely.
So we also wanted to mention that it's really important to note that if you feel unsafe around any person that you're in a relationship with, please connect with your local safe house, shelter, social worker, crisis center, crisis line, whatever it is, to create a safe exit strategy for yourself. Because this, again, the work that we're talking about here is comes from a place of awareness and consciousness and personal responsibility. And oftentimes people are not in that space.
Yeah.
And if you feel unsafe, regardless of the gender or the relationship that you're in, please, please, please advocate for that with your local resources and reach out for help in that regard. Do not try to confront, do not try to coerce, do not try to
self-advocate.
be self-advocate in those situations, because oftentimes you can get hurt. It can be worse, and it's really shitty and it's really unfortunate. And for anybody listening to this right now that might be in that situation, I am so sorry that you were in that situation right now. And I feel for you, and I beg of you to please reach out to your local resources, family, friends. You don't deserve to be in this position, no matter what you might be thinking, no matter how much you might believe that you do, or no matter how much you might believe that you're not safe or that you can't get out of it. You can.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Anyway, sorry, I digressed.
That's okay.
I
It's
got a
really
little emotional
important.
there.
Yeah, it's really important.
It's really important. So, okay. So anyway, so let's move on.
Oh, and we also have this lovely handout that's quite wordy.
Oh,
we might not get through all of it. So if you would like a copy of it, please reach out and send us a message so we can send it to you.
Yeah, send us a message, include it in the comments below, and we'll be happy to reach out to you and get it to you as soon as we can. So,
You bet.
and thank you for those of you that decide to do that, for your continued support and encouragement. We appreciate you. Okay, so let's get into this bad boy. All right. So number one is probably actually my favorite. I don't know why, but I think it is.
And this comes in under, this comes in under if you are the one in the toxic relationship, right? So you're, yeah,
go ahead.
Is it not?
Well, it's both, I think, actually, at least for me anyway. And maybe I'm getting a little sidetracked here even as we start, but it's both for me, because I'll tell you, because if we can pay attention to the somatics of our somatics, like, in other words, what are the tension, what's the feeling in our body when we're around this person? And I think it works for both sides of the coin. If you are the person in a toxic relationship, and every time you're around this person, your chest starts to tighten, or your shoulders start to tighten, or your ears get red, or your sphincter starts to tighten, whatever it is, right?
Yes, sorry.
Right?
Yes.
I had to throw that one in there. Whatever it is, pay attention to that. What is that trying to tell you? Are you safe within that person's presence? And then on the flip side of that, though, if you're the person that's exhibiting toxic behaviors, what are those physical feelings? Do you feel tense around a certain person that you're feeling like you have to control, or that you're afraid of, and so you get domineering, or
defensive,
micromanaging, defensive around, or whatever, right? So it works kind of both ways. What's the physical reactions that you're having, right? Do they give you butterflies? That might be anxiety. In some cases, that's a good thing.
Well, yeah,
I think it's not a good thing.
Yeah, I think we've romanticized that feeling of butterflies as something that's always a good thing.
Yeah, I don't know
that can be
sometimes.
Yeah, that can be actually, I feel very unstable and off balance when I'm around you.
Yeah. Right.
And that can give me anxiety that I'm interpreting as, romanticism.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more about some other romantic feelings that we both feel are actually kind of toxic. The other one that you point out here is, do you feel drained after being with this person? That's a big one too. Like, does it take a lot of your energy and resources to be around certain people?
Yeah.
And if it does, maybe you can't avoid those people, but maybe you can work on managing those emotions and those resources a little bit more, so that when you do have to step into the energy with that person, that you know how to navigate through that a little bit better, and they don't have as big an impact on you.
Yes. And you can limit maybe the amount of time or the circumstances. Yeah.
Well, but I mean, yeah, you can if you're able to, but let's say it's a professional thing and you're not able to limit the amount of time because you have to be there 8 hours a day. Right. And so, when you recognize, okay, this person exhibits these 3 behaviors, and these 3 behaviors make me feel drained after every time I interact with them. Okay, so then how do I manage that? Right. How do I take responsibility for my interactions with that person?
Right.
It doesn't impact me. Right.
Yeah. Something else that comes up in there is, do you feel that their reasoning for their behavior is confusing, but it seems rational? So that can be kind of a technique that is being used, right? So I have a lot of, like, I was the queen of justification, let me tell you. So typing this morning brought up a lot of shit for me. I will be honest, I will own that. And I
Bet.
know that I was the queen of justification in a lot of my previous relationships because I felt that my needs weren't being met and I didn't know how to advocate for myself. I didn't feel safe enough uh, advocating for my needs in a mature way. So instead, I would act out and then I would justify. I would act out and then I would justify. Sometimes that justification was, just to myself because no one knew that I had acted out except for me. But that's still habitualized, normalized patterns that became part of my internal dialogue with myself. And that was not healthy for me. Right.
Mhm.
So, I mean, sorry, that's kind of mixing up both again, but some of these
And
things
so,
do cross over quite a lot
well, they all
between,
cross over.
yeah, between the person who's in
I,
the relationship with the person exhibiting toxic behavior and the person who is exhibiting the behavior. So,
well, something just came up for me, and I want to touch on it for a second, if you don't mind,
yeah.
kind of taking a little bit of a slight left turn here for
Oh,
a minute.
honey, that's what we're all about.
So you mentioned that sometimes you were justifying those behaviors to yourself because nobody else knew about them.
Mhm.
So what about the toxic relationship that we have with ourselves?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Huge. Huge.
Right? Right? Because that's ultimately like we have to look ourselves in the mirror. We have to be comfortable with our own decisions and choices. And sometimes the justification that we can have for some of the really fucked up decisions that I've made in my life is like, I can write a book about it, like
I think you are. I think you should.
yeah. But the point is that the relationship that we have with ourselves and our behaviors
Mm,
and how we perceive those and how
mhm.
toxic that is, right? That also extends out and bleeds into our perception of other people and how
Sure.
they're treating us and how we're treating them, right? So this is all interrelated. We have these on two separate pieces of paper, but that's only because you can't put it all in one piece of paper and make it all. But the reality is that it all definitely melds into each other for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on. Number two. Roll on number two. Notice red flags.
Yeah.
So this is part of the checking the evidence. Okay. So, we're feeling off balance or anxious in this relationship. Is it about our attachment style or is it actually toxic behavior that we're witnessing that we need to assess? Right. And so noticing the red flags is really helpful.
Right.
So some of those are things like you don't feel in control of your decisions. That might be because you're being manipulated, right? In subtle ways or not so subtle ways. And that can become, again, quite normal for people, or you doubt yourself. So,
Hmm.
you bring something up or you recall something that, you had talked about and they change the story. So it starts to bring in self-doubt. Yeah.
Gaslighting.
Gaslighting. Yes. There's a power imbalance or a feeling of dependency. So, and this is not by choice. So if you're in the kink community and, power dynamics are part of the things that you like to explore with your partner, that's different. Um, so you get a sense of what would I do without them? I can't live without you. I would be lost without you. And they support that idea by saying things like, what would you do without me? Or I'm so glad I'm here to help you through this, that kind of thing.
Or
It's
you'd
kind of
be nothing without me.
you'd be nothing without me. Yeah, it can get pretty harsh. Um, and they can lie about what they've done, um, quite quite blatantly, or a little bit more covertly. So
Hmm.
they might take responsibility for a majority of what you have observed, but then there's that one piece that they just kind of dodge. They're just like, nope, that didn't happen, or I didn't do that. And there's that piece again, like we talked about earlier, about not taking responsibility. Sometimes it's a
Right.
matter
I
of
think
even not recognizing it.
And I think it's important to note here, because we've got a lot here that we're not going to be able to cover through all of this, but there's another piece here in terms of that responsibility thing, right?
Mhm.
And that is that their apologies make it your fault,
Mm,
right? So I'm sorry you think I was wrong, or I'm sorry you were upset,
yeah.
right? And then they use those as opportunities to comfort you or be your rescuer, right? So they
Mm,
do something
mm.
hurtful, or they do something that ultimately isn't really your fault, and they don't take responsibility for it. But now they come in and they become the rescuer of sorts, right?
Mhm.
So it's really important to understand that just because somebody's apologizing doesn't mean they're taking responsibility for it.
Oh,
There's a
yes,
there's a huge difference between those two things, right? And
huge.
and right, and that's a red flag, frankly, in my opinion. If somebody continually says, "I'm sorry," but keeps repeating the behavior, or says, "I'm sorry that you're feeling hurt," you know, unless it's followed with "by my actions,"
And
you know,
I'm looking at how to be better, you know?
yeah, right,
Yeah,
and exactly, and I'm taking responsibility for that so that we don't have this happen again, et cetera, right?
yeah,
But it's just really important to understand that an apology isn't always taking responsibility,
true enough.
right?
Um, yeah, or maybe you feel like your needs, wants, hopes, desires are dismissed, or you don't feel safe expressing them in the first place, like I was talking about earlier. Yeah.
Right, right.
So
And
those can be really difficult to manage. Go ahead.
it's important to note, though, that we're not talking about one-off situations here, or even two-off situations here. We are talking about patterns of behavior,
Hmm.
right? Over and over again, repeated patterns of behavior. So if you and somebody that that you're in a relationship with that you feel might be toxic, the relationship might be toxic,
Thank
and
you.
these things are only happening. Yeah, sorry. And these things are only happening, like, somebody uses the wrong phrase, or says, I'm sorry that you're hurt, right? Instead of saying, I'm sorry that I hurt you, right? But that's not usually the way they do things. That doesn't necessarily mean it's toxic behavior. It just means it's somebody who's in the throes of trying to deal with the situation and may not be managing it all that great. So this is about behavior patterns over time. It's not one-off, two-off things, right? Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, and I would say look for the cocktail, right? If they're creating a cocktail of a variety of these things,
Right,
that's habitualized toxic behavior, right? If
right.
it's, I'm frustrated right now because I lost my job and I feel crappy about my life and my worth in the world, and I'm
Yeah,
communicating poorly because I'm just being an asshole to everybody.
yeah.
That's a circumstantial kind of situation where, managing that is about managing the emotions around the event. It's not chronic. It's not a, it's a situational issue.
Right. That doesn't mean that if somebody's being an asshole to you because of something, well, if they're
That
being an
happened
asshole
to
to you
them. Yeah.
for that happened to them, that you need to, you know, be involved in that. But that's ultimately your choice as to whether you want to. But does that mean that relationship is toxic? No, I don't think so. I think it means that situation is very challenging, and the person that's dealing with that is really challenged with how to deal with that effectively and healthy. And shit, when that happened to me, I certainly didn't know how to deal with it very well. It was a very hard thing to deal with, for
I
sure.
hardly noticed.
Yeah. All right. So should we move on to the next one?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So create and honor your own personal boundaries,
Mhm.
right? And so go ahead.
Yeah, that can be really hard. If you if you
Okay, that's all we're going to say about that.
yeah, if you, like me, didn't know about boundaries until much later in life, it can
Yeah.
feel really daunting to have somebody say, "Create and honor your own boundaries." Like,
Huh?
what? Yeah.
What are
Okay.
boundaries? What?
Yeah, yeah.
What is this strange word you use? Boundaries. Boundaries. Like, are we talking about boundaries around countries or what? Well,
It's
I
brutal.
think I think what we're talking about is the boundaries are sort of where you begin and another person ends, right? So this is boundaries are created using I statements. This is what I will tolerate. This is what I want. This is what I need in a relationship. This is what I won't tolerate. This is who I am as a person. And boundaries and values are sort of they're interlinked, and they are the core of the work that we do with our clients.
Absolutely.
If you don't have a good sense of your boundaries and you don't have a good sense of your core values, then the chances that you're allowing behaviors into your life and exhibiting behaviors in your life that might show up as toxic, even just occasionally, are
Mhm.
much greater, and your awareness around those behaviors is probably much less. But once
Mhm.
you get an idea of what your boundary is, and maybe we can give an example here, right? I mean, we have a list of personal boundaries and stuff, right? And so
Mhm.
maybe one boundary is for you. I mean, a great boundary for you is you will not be yelled at. You don't like people raising their voice to you, right?
Right.
I, on the other hand, have a loud voice by nature. I'm also half deaf. And so sometimes I get loud, especially when I get passionate, whether it's a good kind of passionate or whether it's an angry kind of passionate. I will sometimes get loud, and that is a boundary for you. I've had to learn how to navigate my behavior around your boundary, right? And
Mhm.
that's exactly what the boundary is for. So when I recognize that I'm starting to get loud, or when you say, "Hey, can you bring it down a few notches?" right? I have to honor that as somebody who cares about you and who loves you. I want to honor that.
And I do too, right? Like I need to say, okay, that's getting too loud for me. I'm not hearing you anymore. And that's the whole point of communication is even when we're angry, we want to be heard. But if raising our voices is helping the other person tune us out, that's not what we want, right? So if I
Mhm.
say, hey, it's getting too loud and you are unable to or refuse to lower your voice, I need to honor my boundary. I need to step out of that situation and say, that's enough. I'm not listening, right?
Right,
And that's
right.
about honoring myself, showing up for me and letting me know that I've got this situation under control for myself, right?
Right. And the interesting thing is that when I do get loud, it's often not because of any aggressiveness. It's just because that's just the way that the energy flows out of me. You know, I'm not intending to be aggressive or assertive. But having said that, there have been times where that's not true, or there have been times where I have felt aggressive and I felt very defensive and very scared. And that was one of the tools that I learned very early in my life to get attention,
For
was
sure.
to temper tantrums and stuff as a child. Um,
Right. Exactly. And so these are learned
so
behaviors, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so one of the interesting things about that particular situation is that when you first started telling me to it's getting too loud or whatever, I actually took that personally,
Hmm.
and it made me a little angrier at first,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And over time, as you continued to advocate for that boundary and you continued to tell me, I started to recognize that it's not about me, it's
Mm-mm.
about you.
Yeah.
And if I want you to hear me, then I have to adjust my behavior accordingly in order for that to happen.
Yeah. Now, I just want to throw in a caveat here because I just had this conversation with a client who was very empowered by her new boundaries, by the way. Uh, but we also talked about how she's in control of where the line in the sand is. What
Mhm,
is a deal breaker and what is not? And it might be by situation, right? It might
mhm,
be one day she's feeling strong and capable of navigating through somebody's, unhealthy toxic behaviors without judgment, without taking it personally, without having to leave, and it's fine, right? And another day that boundary has to be honored, like the yelling boundary, right? So there are
mhm.
times when you and I have been in a heated discussion and we've yelled, both of us, ironically. Um, Ironically, my boundary doesn't hold to me. It's only about other people yelling at me. But that's because I get scared, I get nervous. But as I begin to also navigate this more with you and I understand you better and I trust you more, I am able to tolerate more, right? If I'm on a good day, if I'm having a good day. If I'm not having a good day and I'm feeling weak, then it's very much I need to honor this. This has to be honored today, right? I'm in
Just
control
stop.
of that
Yeah.
though. Nobody else gets to tell me when it's a line in the sand and when it's not. For me, I'm in charge of my boundaries, and I'm the only one who can negotiate them. Right.
And then so on the other side of that,
Yeah.
right? So the
Yeah.
person that's receiving that information, maybe yesterday it was okay and today it's not, that might become frustrating or confusing. To them, I say, I feel you, but tough shit.
Yeah. People
I
change.
mean,
We're different every day.
we have to use those things as opportunities for us. If we're the ones that are receiving that, well, yesterday it was okay, today it's not. We have to use those as opportunities to be more flexible, to be more understanding, to be more compassionate and kind, and recognize that, yeah, maybe it is frustrating. And you know what? For sure, it's absolutely, and you're entitled to be frustrated. You're entitled to be angry. You're entitled to be pissed off as hell about it. But what you're not entitled to do is to continue the behavior.
Right.
And force that behavior on somebody. If you're unable to manage your frustration or your anger, then leave the situation completely and go find some other outlet for that frustration, for that anger. That's healthy, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I don't say tough shit very often, but but no, seriously, but that's kind of what I've had to do sometimes, is say, you know what, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling angry because yesterday or last time we had this conversation, it was okay. And this time it's not. And I'm like, well, fuck, that's really frustrating because I want to talk about this, or I want to get this out of me, or whatever. Right. And I've had to say, well, tough shit, Greg. Now is not the time to do that. So go write it down, go journal about it, go blog about it, go
Work
for a
out.
walk, go work out, go do something that doesn't involve the person that's setting the boundary. If you're not able to change the subject, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe you take that frustration out by doing something kind for that person, making him a tea or a coffee or whatever.
Or do something kind for yourself.
I don't. Yeah, and do something kind for yourself too.
Self-soothe,
You have
man.
to, because you have to treat that. You have to pay attention to that emotion, that feeling that's coming up for you, or else it's just going to keep overwhelming you each time it happens. You have to acknowledge it. So it does work on both sides of that coin.
Yeah, when we talk about big emotions, self-protecting emotions, life-protecting emotions like fear, right? That fear is coming up to protect us for a reason. We might have very good reasons for it, but it's about us. It's not necessarily even about the other person and what's happening, right? It can be a reaction that is a projection from our past, from our trauma, from our wounds. And self-soothing in those cases is really important. Using the body to process the emotion is really important. Moving your body, getting active, Yeah.
3 C's is another great example of that.
3 C's. Contact Greg for more information.
Yeah. But what I wanted to say to that too, though, is that sometimes, not sometimes, but all the time, when you first started doing that, I took that personally. I took it that you didn't care about me. And so
when
one of the things
it was me caring about me.
So exactly. And so one of the things that's really been helpful for me, and for those of you out there who are struggling with other people advocating for their boundaries, this has been, I don't know where I got this from, to be honest with you. And I don't want to say I made it up on my own because I don't think I'm that smart, but I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. One of the things that's been really, really helpful for me is thanking the person. So you advocate for your boundary. I can't do this right now. I can't have this conversation with you right now because I'm just so overwhelmed and I get frustrated or I get angry and I'm like, well, she doesn't love me or she doesn't like me. Wait a minute, stop. Okay, so thank you, Leanne, for advocating for your boundaries and looking after somebody that I love and care about.
Which is huge for me, by the way. That is just such a gift because it reinforces that self-advocacy is not only okay, but it is self-care and it's important. And that I don't think I felt like I was taught that. I mean, I love my parents. They did the best that they could, but I feel like self-advocacy was kind of, dicey a little bit, and that our needs were not always taken in consideration. They'll probably argue the point. My mom would argue that probably, but anyway, we should probably move on because there's so much. There's
Nice.
so much more.
Okay. All right. So I think we've actually already talked about this next one to some degree. Communicate
Yes.
your needs once, right? And then so just to further kind of just one other thing about that is take baby steps and also understand that shit's going to get awkward. Like
Yeah.
once you start advocating for your boundaries and once you start really stepping into that, some people might even get pissed off about it. Like I've had
Yeah.
clients who've texted me saying, I just had a really crazy conversation with my sister and now she fucking hates me. Well, does she hate you? No. I just don't think she knows who you are anymore because you're showing up in a very different way now. And
Yeah.
so that's scary for her, right? And so that's a very different reaction than the one you've been giving her all your life. And so the reality is that it's not that, and maybe she does hate you right now, but that's not your problem. What? Because you're
She
advocate,
hates the boundary because it's in
right?
her way,
Right.
right?
It's in her way of getting whatever it was that she's always gotten from you in those situations.
Yeah.
Right. And so she interprets that as, or so that feels a lot like that somebody hates you. But the reality is that they don't. They're just scared. They just don't know what to do with this new version of you. So it will get awkward. It will get weird. It will get weird for you to do it.
And
It'll get weird and
it might be the case that it is so awkward for them that they don't know how to be in a relationship with you, and that's okay too. What's more
yeah,
important is the, you know, set, showing up for yourself, right?
right,
Standing up
right,
for yourself in those cases where you need to be heard and you get to be heard just as much as anybody else, right?
right. Yeah.
Um,
So number six,
yep.
whether you choose to continue in the relationship or not, get help to work on your self-esteem and worthiness. Contact us for more information about that because that
Mhm.
is exactly the work that we do. As a relationship and empowerment coaches, that's the work that we do. Is we always start. I don't know about you, but I always start each session out by saying, I'm not here to save your relationship. What I'm here to do is empower you to make decisions in your relationships that feel good for you and get you closer to where you want to be as a person. And there's a very different set of circumstances and rules that go along with that and processes. So it's really important to
Absolutely.
understand. It's really important to understand that whether you choose to continue a relationship or not, this work is about you because that's the
Yep.
only thing that you have control over.
Yep.
It's the only thing that you can do really anything about. You can't change other people's perceptions or feelings or behaviors or thoughts about you at all,
Mhm.
right?
Exactly.
I think I'm more passionate about this particular topic than I expected to be. This is kind of fun.
I know. I've been up since 6:30 this morning working on it
Yeah.
because I
Well, I,
got invested.
I think part of this too is I have more energy today for the first time in 3 days. So,
Well,
booster
yes,
shot, man.
booster
That
shot.
booster shot was a jerk. Anyway, you want to do number 7?
Sure. So think about how the relationship may have served you. So what I mean by that, or what we mean by that, is served your limiting beliefs, because we all have them about ourselves. Um, and then get help to shift out of that unhelpful self-talk. Um, and again, contact us for more information. It's not your fault that you were in or are in this relationship, but it is your responsibility to heal the wounds that promote accepting this kind of behavior, right?
Mhm.
That's what we have control over, like you were just saying. I don't think we really, and remember that drama can be addictive. We'll talk about that more on the flip side too.
I do want to say something about that though,
Okay.
just really quick for those maybe first time listeners that aren't aware of the foundational principle behind fault versus responsibility.
Okay.
So I just kind of want to unpack that just for a minute, just so that
You
they
bet.
understand what we're trying to say. Because oftentimes people can hear that as victim blaming in some ways. So what we're trying to say here is, and this actually, I got this idea from Mark Manson in his book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And that is that something may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. And the example that I use is if somebody breaks into your car, that's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to deal with the aftermath of that, calling the police, calling the insurance company, getting it fixed, et cetera, et cetera. So while it's not your fault, you didn't ask for this, you didn't do it, you still have to deal with it. And that responsibility is put on you and no one else. So you can ask for help for it for sure.
You can
But that's
ask
what
for
we
help. I was
mean.
just going to say that. Yeah. Great.
And then
Yeah.
there are times where something is your fault and it is your responsibility.
Yeah.
So if you break into your own car, and if you break your own windshield with a baseball bat, that's your fault, and it's your responsibility to do it. So there is a difference between the two things,
Mhm.
fault and responsibility. So I just wanted to make that clear, and that's
Thank
what we were
you.
talking about.
Yeah. And depending on the level of toxic behavior, it might be okay to stay in the relationship while you both work on healing the wounds, addressing the behavior, making the shifts in thinking, addressing the limiting beliefs, right? We've
Setting clear
certainly done that.
boundaries.
Huh?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, setting clear boundaries. I don't know
Yeah.
that there's ever been a relationship in the history of the world where people haven't come in with some level of of toxic behavior.
Yeah.
Maybe it's small, and even those who would say that that they aren't or haven't been that person, I'm sure you were that person at one point.
To someone.
Maybe to someone, but maybe not on a grand scale by any means, but still. And we'll talk a bit about that in a minute when we talk about emotions that are romanticized, right?
Mhm.
And so it's important to understand that just because it doesn't appear to be toxic doesn't mean it isn't. And
Right.
so that's what we mean is you can still be in a relationship. You don't have to disconnect from every relationship that's toxic.
Yeah, you'd be
If
hard pressed to find one that doesn't have
Yeah.
some level of toxic behavior.
Right.
Yeah.
If both people or all people involved in the relationship are willing to do the work
Right.
and take
Exactly.
responsibility for their part in the relationship. If not, then maybe it's a mother or a father or whatever. And so you
Mhm.
have to limit your time with them, and you have to
Right.
manage them or manage your emotions and your resources while you're with them, right?
Correct. Yeah. Good point.
But you
Good
don't
point.
have to end the relationship, I guess, is what we're saying.
Right. Right.
Okay. All right.
So this dovetails nicely into if you are the one with the toxic behavior, right?
Mhm.
So we were just saying many of us have these normalized behaviors that we've learned or we've developed as coping mechanisms. Um, so some commonly accepted toxic behaviors are things like guilt tripping, a desire to control others, passive aggressive manipulation, hurtful humor, like sarcasm, slamming things, throwing things, or yelling things to make a point, withdrawing or withholding attention or affection to get what we want. These are not only commonly accepted, but some of them are highly utilized in our media, in our fiction, in our um, dramas that we see in movies and television as signs that we care, right?
Right. I can't tell you the number of times that I've listened to a song, and this is really interesting to me because it really opened my eyes up to this. I'm a huge fan of 80s hard rock and hair metal. And I can't tell you how many times I've listened to this since doing this work in the last, 5, 6 years, and realized just the inherent level of toxicity in these behaviors.
Yeah.
And I'm like, holy fuck, like how many times have I heard, I don't care if you say no, I'm still gonna make you mine. And the level of acceptance of that kind of behavior is crazy. Um, right? But it's everywhere, right? Like,
Right.
but not just even in 80s hair metal, but it's in songs, it's in country songs, it's in movies that we watch,
Yeah.
right? How many movies have we watched where the guy just didn't give up,
Right. Right.
even though she kept saying no and no and no, and then eventually she gave in.
Right. Right.
It's romanticized, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, I,
That was me.
yeah,
I did that
right.
so many times.
You have a personal experience about that, actually. That's
Yeah.
quite funny. I mean, you advocated for a boundary, and with two people, and then one of them respected the boundary, and the other one didn't. And
And I
I'll let
chose
you
the
tell
one
that
who
story.
didn't because I romanticized it,
Right,
right?
right,
Because he was stalking me.
right.
I thought he must love me more. Right.
Exactly, exactly. I stalk you because I love you.
Oh,
Like,
oh
oh
my
Jesus Christ.
God.
Another one is jealousy, right?
Jealousy.
Another
Yeah.
one
As
is
a, mhm.
jealousy has been romanticized incredibly. And jealousy is a huge part of the work that I do with clients. Like I get
Me
so
too.
many clients reaching out to me because of these feelings of managing jealousy and stuff. And the interesting thing about it is that jealousy is never about the other person. It's always about you. Well, I shouldn't say never, because there are times where there might be toxic behaviors that are coming up that the jealousy is trying to tune you into. So that
Right.
information isn't necessarily all about you. But in most cases, it's almost in most cases it's an internalized perception, limiting belief, narrative that you have about yourself and your
Hmm.
self-worth and your self-esteem that brings that feeling up, right? But we've
Right.
romanticized it, right? Oh, I'm so jealous, nobody else can have you, or nobody else, will ever treat you as well as I do, or right, all of that stuff. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before about on the first page about somebody, what was you were saying, uh, about being in control of you, right? That's one of the ways that they can manipulate you, is by
Hmm.
telling you things like that, letting you know that, nobody else is going to treat you as good as I have, or whatever, right?
Hmm.
And, you're with that other guy and I'm feeling jealous about that. Well, it's not really about them, it's about you, isn't it? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but you're right. There are times and places where that toxic behavior is external and not from our stories, limiting beliefs, and internalized dialogue. So we do need to double check the evidence. Like, is there actually toxic behaviors happening out here that we don't have control over? Or are they things that we can shift internally or work with internally ourselves, right?
Should we give an example of what we're talking about? Like the difference, just to,
Well, okay, where jealousy is concerned. Say the toxic behavior is that you're in a monogamous relationship, but every time you go out with your significant other, they are flirting with, talking to, chatting up everybody else around you that's attractive, right? And
Mhm,
spending very little time, attention, energy with you.
mhm,
So there's an imbalance in investment. They're investing externally into other beautiful people and devaluing you by not investing in that relationship while you're out together.
and then add to that the fact that they're doing it in front of you.
Right. So say then you advocate for your needs and you say, hey, listen, we're on a date. I would love to have more of your attention over here and less of your attention out there. Can we do that moving forward? And they say, sure, absolutely, baby. I love you more than anybody. And then it continues,
Right.
right?
That's where it
That's
becomes
toxic
toxic.
behavior, right?
Right.
Maybe they
That doesn't
like
mean that
your jealousy. Maybe they're trying to incite your jealousy. Maybe that feeds something in them, right? Something that they're looking for from you, more attention, even negative from you, right?
and so here's something interesting that comes up. So how would we take this scenario with this monogamous relationship, right? The one that you just presented,
Mhm.
and the one person kind of gets off on this idea of inciting these feelings of jealousy and stuff in their partner.
Mhm.
How could you make that healthy?
Well, I think they need to be willing to look at the behavior and make changes for the purpose of investing in the relationship. And you can address it by advocating, communicating, watching for red flags and watching for habitualized patterns. And if they continue, then you make that line in the sand. You make that line in the
Mhm.
sand for yourself. I'm not going to go out with you anymore to public places because I don't feel comfortable, or I'm not going to stay in a relationship with you because I feel devalued, right?
Right.
And the person who is exhibiting the toxic behavior, if they're willing to make the changes, they have to be willing to do it like every day, all day. It's constant, and that's mentioned here. This is not a process that is easy. The toxic behaviors exist for a reason, and some very good reasons. Again,
Mhm.
so you've learned those behaviors because they served you, and that's maybe all you know. So relearning
Mhm.
new behaviors takes time and effort and monitoring yourself,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, it's bringing those shadow. They call that the shadow work, right?
Hmm.
Which I really enjoy that term because it is in the shadows. It's not something that you pay attention to. And
Mhm.
so if you're the one that's exhibiting, I'm going to rephrase that, when you're the one exhibiting the toxic behaviors, because again, I don't think that anybody is immune to this, but when
Mm.
you're the one exhibiting the toxic behaviors, the responsibility becomes yours to get curious about it, to experiment with it, to explore it, and find out what that behavior serving you.
Well, let's go through these, okay?
Sure.
So it might be unconscious, but you can see that you've got toxic behavior that you're bringing to a relationship by looking at the outcomes and the thoughts that come up. Okay, so there's a
Mhm.
list here. It's quite extensive, but I'm just going to hit on a few. Is the issue always someone else's fault? Do people seek you out, partners, friends, and family, to spend time with you? Do they, when they're with you, show signs of anxiety, people pleasing, or giving up control to you on the regular? I have had that happen with particular people in my life, and I don't like it. I know that this is happening for a reason. I know that there's some sense of power imbalance then. They're people pleasing. They're deferring to me always. They don't have an opinion, or they don't want to offer an opinion. They don't feel safe offering an opinion with me. Maybe that's because of some trauma that they've been through, or maybe that's because of something that I'm doing within the relationship,
Mhm.
right? I've been that person, and I have recognized some toxic controlling behaviors where I've shut down ideas that I didn't think were good enough, or you know, and people start to not want to offer ideas then in my
Mhm.
presence, right?
Right.
Um, is your partner dependent on you, and have you encouraged it? And that could be emotionally, like you said, physically, mentally, or financially. Um, some people encourage that dependency because that's how they can control the other person. That's the only control that they can really have. So they push for it, they create it, they manipulate to make it happen.
Mhm. This one's interesting to me. How many people ended relationships with you?
Mhm. Or you know what? The flip side of that could also be true as a way of controlling the situation. How many of you ended? Because you don't want criticism, right?
Right. Or the person becomes uncontrollable, quote unquote.
Or they ask you to make changes.
Right.
But end it.
Right. Right.
Um, Something that I want to point out is that we can have really passive aggressive toxic behaviors like
Mhm.
always being late, pouting or sulking, forgetting, avoiding, procrastinating so other people have to do it, whatever it is,
Mhm.
being ill when you're not, complaining, being silent when a response would be natural, blaming others for your circumstances, sarcasm, avoiding important discussions, avoiding others who are not happy all the time, choosing to be inefficient. And like I said, shutting out others when they criticize your behavior. Oh, friends off, right?
I like the choosing to be inefficient because it reminds me of when I was a little kid and my stepmom would always ask me to make my own bed. And then I would do a really shitty job of it over and over and over again. And so then she just eventually gave up and started doing it for me.
Right. Well done, you.
Right. That's
Passive
that's a
aggressive
classic
manipulation.
that's a classic example of
Yeah.
passive aggressive, or cleaning the bathroom or whatever it was, right? She just eventually just gave up and said, you know what, I'll just do it myself because it's way more work just having to redo other people's work, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, it's interesting, and I think this one here: do you use humor or insult or to insult or scare others? I want to talk about this one really quick because we're talking about all different kinds of relationships, right?
Mhm.
And there's toxic behaviors in all different kinds of relationships. And I want to touch on toxic masculinity for a minute because this humor to insult or scare others happens all the fucking time.
Mhm.
And it's just becomes so accepted between men, right?
Mm.
Well, I mean, I can't even, like, my mind goes blank because I have such a problem with it.
Yeah.
Like there's such a block where this is concerned because it happened to me so much, and I did it so much too, right? I'm hanging out with my buddies or whatever, and instead of offering words of encouragement or whatever, it's like, oh man, you failed so hard on that. You suck. You can't do any
Mm,
better, as a way of trying to encourage them to do better. But the reality is that you're really just, shitting on them. You're just really being a jerk, right?
yeah.
Instead, you could reframe that as, hey man, I know you gave it your best. You'll do better next time, or you can do better next time, or I feel you, that really hurts. But that's not the kind of language that we use.
No.
It's like, it's really, oh man, I can't believe you. When it comes to relationships, I think too, it's like, oh man, that was a dumb move giving her up. I can't believe you couldn't keep her. It's like, really?
Or if you're
That's
being a compassionate partner and showing up for your person
Mhm.
and they criticize that, right?
Right,
Oh,
right, yeah.
you're so pussy whipped is one that
Yeah,
comes to
you're such a
mind.
wimp. Oh yeah, you pussy whipped and you're such a wimp, right?
God.
Just man up and forget about it,
Yeah. Oh,
bitches be crazy or whatever, right? Like I don't know the phraseology or whatever, but that really, I wanted to point that out because that happens a lot, toxic
yeah.
masculinity. All right. So anyway,
So realizing that while it may not be your fault that, you learned how to behave this way, it is your responsibility to change the behavior. So the same kind of thing as what we were talking about before. Own your stuff, seek help, um, identify your fears, wounds, limiting beliefs, and commit to changing your thinking and it's every moment of every day. So there's a couple of suggestions on here about that. I think we've mentioned them before.
okay, get curious about what you're afraid of. This was huge for me. This was life changing for me. What
Mhm.
do you need to protect yourself from? Ironically, toxic behavior is often a fear of like being alone. And in trying to control others, guess what? You often end up alone,
Right?
right? Or interestingly enough, one of the other things that happens too is in trying to control other people is you often end up feeling alone, even though you're
Mm.
not alone, because we lose respect for the person that we're trying to control in some
Oh,
way.
yeah.
Right. And so now we
Yeah.
go and we seek out other people to try to control because, okay, now I've won that person. I'm controlling that person. So now that person has very little value to me anymore.
Mm.
Right. And so
Oh,
that's another
brutal.
way of feeling alone
Yeah.
in your
Yeah.
relationships. Right. Recognize your wounds. And this is really important. Actually, all of this is important. Recognize that your wounds are not who you are. They are what happened to you. Your wounds don't define you.
Right. Right.
Right. Your wounds don't define you. For some reason, I'm having a
Unless
hard time saying that word.
unless you let them.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Like that's the
Right.
other thing is we can live like that. It's just a really awful way to live when we're
No, and
continually recounting our wounds and picking at them to keep the scab off and to not let them heal. It becomes our identity. It becomes who we are. It becomes how we present to the world, you know? And that does not serve us long term, not very well.
right. And I love the fact that you added long term into that because it might serve us, feel like it serves us in the short term.
Mm,
Like my victim
yeah.
story is massive. Like it's a powerful story. It's like Moby Dick level, in terms of like size and volume of my victim story. But I've learned that it's not serving me any longer. But it has served me in times in my life.
Well,
But
and
it no longer,
it certainly does serve you when your limiting beliefs are all you're listening to, when that's your
right.
internal dialogue.
Exactly. Exactly. That's a great point. So yeah, so realizing that your wounds don't define you is huge
Yeah.
because the behaviors that you're exhibiting aren't who you really are. It's just the way you've been shown. It's the way you've been programmed. And there is an opportunity to change that if you want to do that. And if you want to show up in your relationships and feel more seen, more heard, and be more connected to other people,
Hmm.
right?
Isn't that what we are
And then the
all
last one,
wanting?
yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah, I think even those of us that claim that we don't want that, I think ultimately still do. Everly's saying hi.
That's our dog. She's high strung, and apparently there's somebody outside making noise.
Right. So the last one here is realize that your own toxic behavior can be an addiction. It can be just like an addiction. We get addicted to it, and you need to treat it as such. If you relapse, take responsibility, make a true apology and amends. And this is really important here. And try not to judge yourself for it.
Right.
Understand that understand that oftentimes these behaviors and these thought patterns are so automatic that it takes time and energy and persistence and practice to rewire yourself, right? So if you fuck it up, own it, but try not to own it with judgment of yourself, right? And one of the classic things, one of the classic ways that we can do this is that you put down here, I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm working on how to change that behavior. It's a beautiful line, right? And you can even say that to yourself in the mirror. I'm sorry that, and actually I talk about this, I get emotional because this has really been a powerful part of my work, is because I judge myself so harshly when I hurt other people. I judge myself so harshly because I'm so afraid that they're going to abandon me or hurt me or leave me again. Right? And so I immediately think, oh my God, I'm such an asshole. Well, no, I'm a recovering asshole, sure, but no, I'm not an asshole. I made a dumb choice. I made an unhealthy and damaging choice, and I need to take responsibility for that. But it doesn't define who I am, right?
Yes.
And so I think that's really important to say that to yourself too, because not only are you hurting other people, but you're hurting yourself too. You know, I'm sorry. Look in the mirror and say, I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm working on how to change that behavior.
Yeah.
And that's huge.
Thank you, honey. Thank you for sharing that. I know that's not easy.
It's not easy. And it actually kind of took me by surprise. I didn't expect that to happen. But I think that's a lot of my narrative. And maybe that's a lot of the narrative out there for people that struggle with these toxic behaviors is that we feel like we have to do it because we don't have a choice. Right? If we don't do it, then we're going to be somehow perceived as weak or vulnerable or being taken advantage of, or I don't know, whatever, hurt again. Right? And I think honestly, it starts with taking responsibility for your actions, and it starts with understanding that these are patterns of behavior. The grooves in your brain are deep in this shit, deep. And it doesn't happen overnight. And you just got to keep reminding yourself over and over and over again to be kind to yourself and to be kind to other people in the process of this.
Yeah. When we picked this topic, I thought, initially, this will be easy.
We do that all the time, every topic. We're like, oh yeah, this will be a breeze. No problem.
Yeah, we'll get this done in 20 minutes.
2 hours in 20 minutes, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up, don't you?
I do, yeah.
All right.
Absolutely. I feel like I've got to put some, ending sentence on this, but I don't want to do that.
I think you did just fine.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. And remember,
choose love
and keep it kind.
We'd love to hear your comments, questions, or topic suggestions. And remember to subscribe.
And you're invited to join our Facebook group, Empowered Now Relationship Support and Advice for All.
You can reach out to us on our websites at gregmillion.com
and leannemillion.com.
Or follow us on Instagram at gregmillion.lifecoach.
And at Leanne Million.